Welcome to Cinema Convos. This is the show where we bring guests with different tastes in film. I'm your host, Yash, and I'm here with my producer, Zach, and our special guest, David. And today we're discussing the classic movie, It's a Wonderful Life from 1946, directed by Frank Capra and starring Jimmy Stewart. So before we get started, if you haven't seen this movie, we are probably going to get into talking spoilers. So we don't want the movie spoiled for you. So if you haven't seen the movie, we recommend watching the movie before listening to this. So just to get the ball rolling, David, I'd like to ask you, what is, either your first memory or your best memory with this movie?
Best memory? Well, I watched this by myself one time, but I introduced it to my family. And so one time during Christmas, I think it was like 2 years ago, we all sat down as a family and watched it, and everyone enjoyed it. And I think that's probably my favorite memory with the film.
Okay. What about you, Zach?
In my family, we watch it at Christmas every year. I can't really think of a very specific time, but just me and my mom watching it Christmas Eve usually, and that's one of the highlights of the holiday season.
Yeah, for me, my experience with this movie is kind of different from most people. Most people I talk to say they watch it every Christmas and every holiday season. For me, actually, I got around to watching this movie for the first time only December 2018. And it was a movie I'd already obviously had heard a lot about it. And I was always curious to watch it. And I watched it on a streaming service. I think it was Prime. And something that's kind of interesting about when I watched it is I actually watched this movie in color because it was available in color. Which I don't think it makes a difference in the quality of the movie, but it was kind of cool to see an older movie remastered like that. And yeah, I mean, it's a movie I can see myself watching again. It's definitely a movie I understand why it's a tradition for so many people, just because of a lot of the themes in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. So yeah, for me, it's I've seen it once, but it was pretty recent. It was 2 years ago. So yeah, it's also one of those movies that for a long time I didn't really I tended to avoid older movies, but this is one of the movies that showed me that an old movie can have just as much of an influence today, and I can like it a lot and enjoy it.
I got into older movies more in my teens, and this was one of those movies that I really gravitated toward.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's just certain aspects of it that I absolutely love, kind of the mood and style that it encapsulates. I also feel like watching it, and I guess the same could be said for a lot of black and white older movies. I feel like you're almost transported back into that time.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, moving on from I guess everything we've talked about, David, what are some of your favorite aspects of this movie and why it resonates with you so much?
So some of my favorite aspects are just the overall positivity of the film. I tend to gravitate towards those types of films, just those with uplifting messages. So some of my other favorite films are Short Term 12, 12 Angry Men, Shawshank Redemption. So just those really positive messages. And even though, George Bailey, he goes through a really dark and tough time, he sort of realizes what he lost and what he loves in his life, and just the various different things that he had to go through to get to the point where he wanted to essentially kill himself, and then realize what he'd be leaving and the impact that would leave on the people that he had impacted. And I think it's truly a relatable film as well. And I think that's why I really like it as well, because I think all of us have been down that road during our time in our lives. We've all been not necessarily suicidal, but just have had that thought of what would it be like if I was never born, or how would the people be impacted without me being there, stuff like that. And I think it's really interesting to see a visual representation of that. And I think this is one of those. I mean, there are probably other films, but I probably can't think of them right now. But this is one of those quintessential films for that sort of theme.
Dear Father in heaven, I'm not a praying man, but if you're up there and you can hear me, show me the way. I'm at the end of my rope, right? Show me the way, oh God.
I think while most people ideally haven't experienced like the same level of, sadness that the main character in this movie feels, I think, we've all had obstacles in our life that make us, question a lot of things about like, is our life meaningful? Like, what impact am I going to have? I'm just a normal person, but this movie kind of goes into how like a normal everyday person, for the sake of the term, kind of impacts so many people's lives without even realizing it. So
Yeah,
it kind of speaks to how we can we might not be making a difference in our own lives, but you never know when you're making a difference in someone else's life. I think
Yeah, for sure.
that's a powerful statement. That is why this movie is so powerful for so many people, is because, it's so true. Like, things might be rough for you in the current moment, but you don't know how many lives you've changed along the way. You can't really measure that until like looking back. And
Yeah,
he
for
kind of
sure.
has a chance to like look back at that
Mhm.
through this
Yeah.
movie's storyline. So I think that's a really cool thing. Yeah, I can't think of another movie that did it like as well as this movie has. I know movies have tried to generate the same feeling over the years, but I think this is a classic for a reason.
One theme in this movie that I think rises above the rest is the message of gratitude. That's being thankful for everything that you have. Because even though things at the time may look pretty bleak and you really can't see everything that you have, it's really important to always count your blessings. Once George Bailey sees how awful things would have been for other people if he hadn't have been born, feeling sorry for himself isn't really something he's thinking about anymore. He realizes truly just how lucky he is. And that's a theme that really resonated with me.
For sure. A lot of the themes in the movie are why so many people watch this every holiday season, and just kind of as a reminder to that statement.
Yeah. But even some of the things that happen in this film are just crazy, and it's definitely a different society back then than it is now, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because George Bailey, he gives up a lot for other people.
Yeah.
And I can't say I've done as much as, George Bailey has, because he's done a crazy amount, like in this fictional story. But one thing that I thought was crazy is like he gives his college tuition to his brother so he can go to college, and George goes to run the family business instead. What's crazy is that he made a promise with his brother, and his brother's name is Harry. And so he's like, Harry, like after you graduate college, you have to take over the business. And then after that, after he did graduate college and George addressed it, his brother was like, nah, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm taking this other job that my father-in-law gave me. And that's so fucked up. Like, can you imagine that? Like,
yeah, I'd be like, nope, psych.
Yeah,
not doing
like,
that, even
like,
though we had an agreement.
I know, right? It's like, bro, I gave you my college tuition and you're just gonna do me like that?
Yeah, it's crazy. I can't even imagine something like that happening today.
Yeah, dude. Like, I feel like I would be devastated. Like, I wouldn't know what to do.
Sure.
Right.
I mean, it's like a lot of different aspects of his life kind of build on each other, and that's how he gets to the place where he is in the movie. They kind of show us like highlights of his life, but then they also kind of turn the tables and show how, because of what he did, like a lot of people's lives have changed for the better too.
Yeah, definitely.
A lot of it's just about perspective, I think, is what it's trying to show.
For sure. Yeah.
One moment I remember that sort of reflects the attitude of the time is when George was seeing the world where he was never born. He's walking around town, he's confused, he's saying things that don't make sense to anyone else. And the way that he's treated by everyone else as being crazy and dangerous, and how hostile they were toward him, that was pretty unsettling to me. They would keep asking him what was the matter with him, and they tried to arrest him just for not making sense. And while the things that George was saying were not true in that reality, I feel like that scene really shows just how far attitudes about mental illness and just eccentric behavior in general have come.
That does it. Out you two pixies go, through the door or out the window.
Nick, what's wrong?
No, that's another thing. Where do you come off calling me Nick?
Well, Nick, that's your name.
What's that got to do with it? I don't know you from Adam's off ox. Would you show these gentlemen to the door?
Sure. This way, gentlemen.
Get me. I'll give them out wings.
Something that's kind of interesting about how this is an older movie, and I was having a conversation with someone not too long after I saw it for the first time, and I did some reading online about it too. Zach might be able to speak more to this, but this movie was initially like not a success when it came out.
No, it wasn't. No, it was a flop. It was a commercial flop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard about that, which is just it's interesting to see like such a beloved film to know that it wasn't successful when it came out. I feel like that happens more times than we realize. Like a movie might be ahead of its time, or I don't know how it ages over the years.
Yeah, and one thing that I didn't really think about it whenever I was watching it previously, but the amount that the money was back then, like you don't really think about it.
Oh yeah.
When Billy, like he's one of the workers for George, he's depositing like $8,000 to the bank, and he accidentally gives it to Mr. Potter, who's such a douchebag in the film, obviously. But he accidentally gives him $8,000, and that doesn't sound like a lot, but I was looking at adjusted for inflation how much that would be now, and that's like $110,000.
I know, that's crazy.
110. Can you imagine? Just like,
whoops, I don't have it anymore.
Yeah, I was like, whoops,
Sorry.
I just lost $110,000. And another crazy thing is like all of his friends and townspeople like donated and covered that money for him. Can you imagine? Like
that's just one of the most like beautiful aspects of that film.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's I feel like that is missing from society nowadays. I feel like a lot of people nowadays, I feel like, are very self-serving. I think people want to, do things with their own lives, and they want to, buy their own house, buy their own car. A lot of neighborhoods, like people don't really interact with each other.
Yeah.
Like I don't think
sense of
I can't speak.
Kind of changed, I feel like, over the years.
Definitely. And I feel like I can't speak for you guys, but if you asked me like to name like my closest 5 neighbors, I probably can't tell you their names.
Yeah,
I
don't know my neighbors at all.
I definitely can't say more than like 1 or 2 of them. That's like a stretch. I might have to guess.
Yeah.
And this man, George Bailey, had all his friends and townspeople cover $8,000, essentially $110,000. Like, but I mean, of course, if our friend was ever in a situation like that, because this wasn't even George Bailey's fault. He trusted Billy to deposit this for him, and Billy was like, "Oh, accidentally gave it to Mr. Potter, $100,000." And Mr. Potter, being like the douchebag that he was, didn't want to help George Bailey out, because George even asked Potter for a loan.
Yes, he had the money the whole time, and he's like, "I don't know what you're talking about. You're not getting my money."
Right? And he wouldn't even give George Bailey a loan. George Bailey even offered his own like life insurance as collateral, but he was like, and Potter was like, "Nah, it's better if you die. Yeah, it's better if you die than being alive. Like, I'd make more money that way." And that's super fucked up.
You once called me a warped, frustrated old man. What are you with a warped, frustrated young man? Miserable little clerk crawling in here on your hands and knees and begging for help. No securities, no stocks, no bonds, nothing but a miserable little $500 equity in a life insurance policy. You're worth more dead than alive. Why don't you go to the riffraff you love so much and ask them to let you have $8,000?
I can see your point about people being more selfish nowadays. However, I would argue that an event like people coming together to raise money for George would actually be more likely to happen today. And the reason I say that is because there are more ways to do something like that now, thanks to crowdfunding sites and social media. I feel like if George Bailey were in trouble now, he could post about it on Facebook or something, and maybe someone would start a GoFundMe page for him. But it does speak volumes about the story, that George's friends and family came together to support him, even when it was harder to get the word out back then. This all spread by word of mouth in a day, and I think that's incredible.
Yeah, that is true.
I mean, it makes me wonder, and I genuinely hope they never remake this movie, but if they did, like, what changes would they make? Like,
I don't
they'd
know.
have to adapt for, like, the present day. I hope they never do, but...
I don't think they would. I mean, I genuinely do wonder. I don't think they ever have. Well, I don't
as
think
far as
they
I
have
know,
in
they
America, at
haven't.
least.
Maybe they have. I don't know.
They haven't in America, but I bet you someone's tried, and it just didn't happen for whatever reason.
A lot of movies that do get remade don't really need a remake, so this is definitely one of them.
Yeah, especially because I feel like this movie holds up really, really well. And you can tell that it does because people watch it like yearly and everyone resonates with the message. I don't think, like, at least I can't think of anything that's problematic.
I watched this movie a few years ago, and I thought it held up really well. Case for like a lot of older movies I watch, I always usually find something like, okay, well, that's obviously like because it's an older movie. But for this movie, it seems to flow a lot better in terms of the story and like the pacing and everything. Going back to, this movie's directed by Frank Capra, who is a well-known director from his time. I personally have only seen one other movie by him, which is Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And I saw that one in a government class in high school, and I haven't watched it since. And I feel like I would like it more now that I've watched more movies. But is there anything that either of you guys have to point out about the director's style? Something that stands out to you or appeals to you? We'll start with David and then go to Zach.
I'm not totally sure about Frank Capra's style in comparison to other directors back in the day, like Hitchcock, or I can't really compare.
Yeah, I'm not really an expert on older directors either in terms of their style.
But I mean, overall, I feel like it was well directed, and some of the close shots I haven't really analyzed, and I can't really remember too much about some of the directing style. Probably with the rewatch I'd notice it, but I think a lot of what ticked my boxes or what I really enjoyed was like the plot, and I was like totally focused on that and like everything crazy that was going on with him. But it was still really well directed too. I watched it initially in black and white, and then I watched it in color again, like with my family. But probably Zach has more to talk about on that.
Capra is probably my favorite director of all time. I think he's one of the most influential filmmakers of all time, especially in regards to American cinema. And he's inspired a generation of filmmakers. To me, he's one of the best examples of the American dream. He was a poor Italian immigrant who came here at the turn of the century with almost nothing, but he had a dream to become a filmmaker. So he worked his way up through the industry, and he became one of the best directors of Hollywood's golden age. And then at the peak of his career, the attack on Pearl Harbor happens, and Capra chose to join the army, even though he wasn't drafted. So he served by making pro-military documentary films to inspire both the soldiers and the civilians. And then after the war, he came back home and he made his movie. And what's crazy is that this was like his last major film. Talking about his style, Capra's films feel very realistic for the time, but like they also have a certain level of humor to them as well. His films weren't necessarily comedies, but they did have this certain lighthearted feel to them. And I just think that's really special.
Yeah, kind of bouncing off everything you talked about in terms of like Frank Capra, I guess. Are there any movies that come to either you guys' minds that give you the same feeling or have a similar vibe?
Well, I mean, I guess for me, I guess many other of his films probably answer that. You said Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. It Happened One Night. It's also a great one. Just kind of any other of Frank Capra's work.
Yeah, I think two movies with a similar vibe. 12 Angry Men, I think, is a great example as well. It's not a Frank Capra movie, but just that overall positivity when they're going over the case and whether or not to send this man to jail.
Yeah.
And
we could do a whole episode on that movie. It's a great
movie. Yeah. Shawshank Redemption, even M, towards the end of M, when they're discussing.
Don't say how M ends. I haven't seen it.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
I've not seen M.
But it's a brilliant film as well. And I think something about those films and this film as well is that it takes a very bleak subject and turns it into something positive and hopeful, I think is a really big one. I really love movies about hope. And another thing that I wanted to touch on was what Zach was saying about Frank Capra's ability to make a movie lighthearted on a dark subject. For him to be able to crack jokes, especially with Clarence, the angel in this film, he's so silly and he's so goofy. And step back and think about it. It's like, oh, this angel's being silly and goofy after this guy just tried to kill himself. And if you word it like that, you're like, whoa, that could be insensitive or that's kind of crazy, But it really works, and he pulls it off, is able to comfort George, and it's really powerful the way he does it to find that balance. And I think Frank Capra did a really good job of finding that balance in this film, where you're not overwhelmed with the subject material and it's not too bleak, and it really gives you that hope.
But why, don't they believe in angels? Oh, why should they be surprised when they see one?
He never grew up. How old are you anyway, Clarence?
293.
Next May.
For me, this movie story reminds me a little bit of like A Christmas Carol, which I've seen like two different movies and one stage production. I mean, everyone knows the story of that at this point, and I feel like it's similar in that it shows the main character different perspectives about his life. While it's not exactly like the same message, I feel like in terms of the emotions it tries to generate, it's kind of similar.
I can see that.
So just to add to Frank Capra's genius, the fact that this movie is one of the most celebrated Christmas movies, and usually whenever you think of Christmas, you think of Santa Claus and stuff like that, but the most popular Christmas movie is about a man who wanted to kill himself basically on Christmas Eve, right? He was trying to kill himself on Christmas Eve of all times. Yeah. And so that's crazy to me how one of the most celebrated Christmas movies is about a guy who's trying to kill himself on Christmas Eve. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this movie it is a dark like premise, but by the end of it, it's meant to make you feel positive and hopeful and maybe even a bit reflective depending on where you are in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of memorable scenes in this movie, but I guess I wanted to ask both of you, what is your favorite scene in the movie, and I guess like what is a scene this movie is incomplete without? Like what is the scene that really stands out to you?
So one scene that I really liked, and it sort of tackles the overall theme of the movie, one of the closing scenes, is when George gets a letter from Clarence. And on that letter, it says, "Remember, no man is a failure who has friends. Thanks for the wings." And it's just so nice to have that reminder, like at the very end of the film, where if like, even if you have just like a one friend, it's like one person you've impacted and one person that could rely on you, you can rely on them. It's just really nice to know that if you just have a friend, you're not a failure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that speaks volumes. And it's a nice reminder whenever people are feeling down. And even like, family members, just, having people that you've impacted. Yeah, even if I, just gave you $1 one day, is like, here, get yourself like a snack or something, and it impacted your life somehow that I don't even know. And you just don't know. Like maybe if I didn't give you that $1, you would have slipped on a banana and died, So you just don't know.
Yeah.
Like kind of a real life situation for me recently. Like, I mean, I'm not feeling like George Bailey at all. I'm doing just fine. But like a couple of my friends like invited me to their wedding, and they were like, I was like, I'm not really that close to these people. Why am I invited? And then they told me like, you're a big part of the reason we met in the first place back in high school. And I was like, wow, like I made an impact without even realizing it.
Yeah.
It's the small things we do that can have a big impact in other people's lives.
Yeah, another example is one of my friends, he sold me a guitar whenever I was in high school, I think, like early high school, like a freshman or something. And, I probably wouldn't have loved music if I didn't get that guitar. Like that was my only source of being able to play. And even just the connections that you make, like one friend leading to another friend, leading to another friend. It's just reaching out. Yeah, and it's just so cool to see. And especially with that note, it sort of allows you to reflect on all the threads that are connected to you at the same time. And I think that's why I really like it. It's really powerful. Whenever you take a step back and see who you're connected to and how you got connected to that person.
For sure.
And that link between other people, and it just shows how amazing like the thread of life is and how impactful our seemingly small decisions can be. So
right.
it's really cool.
Okay, so I guess we all clearly really like this movie, but something that's always interesting to ask is there anything that any of you would change or to improve this movie, or would you say it's it's perfect and there's nothing that needs to be changed? And I'll get the ball rolling on that one. I mean, for me, this is a perfect movie. I can't think of anything I would change. Every scene has a purpose to the story and the theme, and for me, it's hard for me to pinpoint anything that needs to be changed, especially considering considering that it was made in the 40s. It's an impressive movie alone because of that. So yeah. For me, I can't think of anything, but if there's anything you guys can think of, I'd be interested to hear about it.
I wouldn't change anything about this movie.
Yeah, I don't think I would change anything.
Yeah, we seem to be pretty in consensus about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a 5 out of 5 for me. Okay, so most people have seen this movie, but I guess if you ran across someone who hadn't seen the movie, what would be your sales pitch? What would you tell them to make them want to watch the movie?
For me, I would say that Frank Capra is one of the greatest directors of all time, and this is the best movie he ever made. Easy sell.
Yeah, this Frank Capra is one of the best directors of all time, and if anyone is deterred at it being an older film, do not be. It holds up very, very well, and if you're looking for a movie about hope through a dark time, this is a great movie. It's a Christmas classic, and it's a Christmas classic for a reason, and I think you should definitely give it a chance. And it's really hard not to like this film because of the overall positive message. It holds up even to this day, to where people are still watching it every Christmas to this day. And you should definitely watch it at least one time. I think that's what I'd probably say.
Yeah,
I agree. Yeah.
I would probably say something similar to both you. But yeah, one thing I would probably throw in is just how I'm generally not. I mean, I've liked a lot of older movies, but I'm not usually one to give a lot of older movies a perfect score. And this is one of the few that I have. So I think it's one of those movies that's timeless and has just a lot of messages that people will always need to hear, regardless of when they're born or how old they are. It should resonate with everyone at some level.
Good idea, Ernie. A toast to my big brother George, the richest man in town.
So yeah, that wraps up our discussion on It's a Wonderful Life. Thanks for listening to Cinema Convos, and thanks, David, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And yeah, we hope you tune in next time.